Support for Civic Summit is made possible by Urban Land Institute, impacting land use issues in Central Texas, austin.uli.org, and by Texas Mutual Insurance Company, providing workers' compensation for Texas employers.
Come January, in an historic shift of governance, only one person at City Hall will represent all of Austin. From a field of 8 candidates, the choice now comes down to 2, Mike Martinez or Steve Adler. For the next hour, hear where the candidates stand on affordability, transportation, equity, growth, and more. This is Civic Summit, Austin Mayoral Debate 2014.
Hello, and thanks for joining us for the final broadcast debate between Mike Martinez and Steve Adler. I'm Jennifer Staten with KUT News. Mr. Martinez and Mr. Adler are on stage in the order they'll appear on the ballot. Each candidate will get 1 minute and 30 seconds to answer each question. Then they'll each get 30 seconds to answer a follow-up question. We'll alternate who answers first. The small color bar in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen is a timer. It changes from green to yellow to red, like a stoplight. Many of our questions today come from topics sent to us from viewers. My co-moderator for this debate is Michael Kanan, the publisher of the Austin Monitor. Our first question comes directly from a viewer. What are each of your top 5 priorities for Austin in order? Mr. Martinez.
Well, it's kind of hard to pick one as the top, but I'll do that since the question asks. Obviously, transportation, affordability, our long-term water crisis, but then basic core city services like public safety are extremely important, and our electric utility.
Mr. Adler.
Again, it's hard to limit it that way, and it's even more difficult to set priorities among the group. But affordability would be key in this city. People say that there are 110 people moving to Austin every day, but there's really 150 people moving in and 40 are leaving. So we're losing a lot of our community. We're losing people. So affordability, I would put up there. Transportation, and certainly that impacts affordability. We actually need to do something. We were the 26th most congested, and now we're 8 years ago, now we're the 4th most congested city. I would also put water, because it's a challenge we're not getting out in front of in a long-term way. I would put the permitting process as symbolic of making government more efficient and better able to move forward. You know, in this city, sometimes it takes 8, 10, 12 months to get done what neighboring cities can get done in just 4 months. Support for education and probably protecting our environment and protecting our neighborhoods.
All right, so for a follow-up, for your top 1 or 2 priorities, how would you go about achieving goals in those areas given current budget realities? Mr. Adler, your 30 seconds first.
Well, beginning with affordability, it's making that a filter through which we look at everything that we do. It means making good decisions. It means not entering into contracts like the $2.3 billion wood-burning power plant that we purchased that sits idle most of the time and costs us $54 million a year while it sits idle. It means giving relief to property owners, homeowners, things like the homestead exemption. It means fixing utilities for renters.
That's time.
Thank you.
Mr. Martinez.
Well, the first thing that I won't do is make promises that I know I can't keep and say things just to gain political edge. Giving a homestead exemption to property owners in Austin, Texas will do nothing to move the needle for people that are in poverty. It will do nothing for the people who need it the most, the renters and those who are on fixed income. We need to have policies that affect all of our residents and that help those who need it the most. If I could take that $36 million for a homestead exemption, I'd invest it in social services, moving the needle on things like poverty.
And that's time. Thank you.
Austin voters rejected Prop 1, the rail and road bond package. What is the next transportation infrastructure investment you'd like the city to make, and how would you pay for it? I believe, Mr. Adler, it's your turn to go first.
I think we need to look at transportation in a long-term way. I think a lot of people voted against Prop 1 because they didn't see how that transportation solution impacted or helped them. If you look at the voting patterns, the people around the perimeter of the city, in fact anywhere other than along that 9.5-mile stretch, voted against it because they didn't believe that it was going to do anything for them. We have 2 million people in the metropolitan area today. We're going to have 4 million people in 20 years, and we have to move those people around. It is a land planning issue as much as anything else, because if we built everything on our 2035 Campo plan, it's our wish list, and we can't afford to do that because it would cost $30 billion. But if we did it all, the drive time at the end of 20 years from Austin to Round Rock is 3 hours. So we can't buy our way out of it. We can't build our way out of it. It's a land planning issue. Austin in 20 years probably has a midtown area. There are things we need to do short term, things like staggered work hours and telecommuting. There are things we need to do in the middle range, like dealing with choke point intersections all around the city, continuous movement intersections around the city, and the things that we can be doing with infrastructure projects. We need to greatly increase the transit availability in our city so that buses start closer to where people need them and end up closer to where people want them to end up. We have to increase ridership. We need to move forward, and it's something that I think people will be willing to do as long as they believe it will actually be getting to them.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
So we said all along that if Proposition 1 passed, Capital Metro was prepared financially. We turned the agency around, and so we have the funds available to pay for the operations and maintenance of urban rail should it pass. Should it fail, Capital Metro is prepared to take the next big step, whatever that may be. Since the voters have spoken and made it very clear that at this point in time, they're not ready, a majority of them are not ready to fund an item like urban rail, we have to become the best bus city in America. And we have to have a public transit system that our citizens can truly choose as an alternative choice. So the one project that I would say is critically important right now to move forward is an expansion of our fixed route bus system and an expansion of our bus rapid transit system and reducing headways on the Red Line, which is a project that's already underway. Your headways will be reduced to every 15 minutes during rush hour traffic on the existing Red Line. Public transportation is the absolute key to the future of solving the traffic and congestion problem in Austin. Steve he just mentioned it. No matter what projects we build, no matter how many lanes we build, they're still not going to solve the traffic problem. For me, the future of Austin is about public transportation.
Okay, Mr. Martinez, as a follow-up, will any of your suggestions there, will they require a trip to the voting box?
It's possible that they could, but as I've said in my comments, Capital Metro we turned the agency around financially, and so we were proposing, we have proposed about $10 to $15 million a year for urban rail should it have passed starting in 2020. I believe that now that we have those funds available, we need to come up with a plan to expand our existing services with that 10 to 15 million.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Adler, voting box?
You know, it depends on what it is that we do. And I'm not convinced that buses long-term is the ultimate answer. Ridership today on Capital Metro is half of what it was, or less than what it was in 2006 and 2008, and it costs twice as much. We can put a lot more buses out on the roads, but if they're stuck in the same traffic that the cars are stuck in, nobody's moving. It's about dedicated lanes, whether there's buses in them or whether there's trains in them. We need to think more long-term.
All right, we're going to stick with transportation for our next question. So we have heard talk of increased rapid bus routes, toll lanes, staggered work hours. But how long will it take for those types of solutions to actually fix Austin's gridlock? Mr. Martinez, you first.
Well, I guess it depends on how you define fixed. Because we know that with the growth that's here, we know that with the 150 people that are moving here each and every day, most of them bringing a vehicle or two with them, no matter what we build and how many lanes we add, there's going to be traffic and congestion in Austin, Texas. So to me, I don't know how a community defines fixing. What I see it as is progress. Do we make progress in reducing your traffic congestion time? Do we make progress in giving you true alternative modes of transportation? Project Connect is a 50-year visioning for how we make progress as it relates to transportation. Proposition 1 was just one small piece of that. Project Connect is new lanes, toll lanes, high occupancy vehicle lanes, it's bike lanes, it's bus, it's expanded rail service. There's an a commuter rail project called the Lone Star Rail Project from San Antonio to Georgetown. Project Connect is that 50-year visioning, and while the voters may have said no to this first proposition, there are many aspects of Project Connect that are currently underway that are being built right now along Mopac and other parts of our city. We need to continue to move forward with Project Connect and have a better conversation with the community so that they understand that transportation is much like any other public service. It's for the entire community. That one little piece may not go to your front door, but it's about the greater system that benefits all of us.
Thank you. Mr. Adler.
I think we do need to fix it in a lot of material ways. The traffic problem we're having right now is dictating where people live. We're sending more and more people downtown because they want to avoid traffic. It's sending property values up, and people are having to leave because they can't afford to live here. It's a driver of gentrification. I'm not sure there are very many people in this city that could identify what our 50-year plan is if we had a 50-year plan. And I think it's a question of leadership. It's something that people do have to understand. They have to see where they fit on that timeline in order to be able to voluntarily participate in a plan. It's lots of different things, and it's just not infrastructure, again, I would add. It's a land planning question. And we need to look at it more broadly, and we need for people to understand and to own what it is that 20 or 25 or 30-year plan, because that's the only way you're going to get a community moving together. People voted against this Proposition 1 because it seemed to be ad hoc. It seemed to be an isolated piece. People looked at that in their newspaper, they folded it up, they put it aside, and they said, that doesn't concern me. And we need to have leadership that will better position and better explain and better put into context what it is that we're trying to do with this city long term. And that's how you get a whole city to move forward. And that's what we need to do.
So a follow-up question actually from a viewer about transportation about this topic. So should the city consider avoiding growth in some areas until more public transportation options are available to service those areas? Mr. Adler, you first.
Well, you know, we avoid growth in some areas that have been environmentally, that are environmentally sensitive, that we're concerned about protecting. Growth is going to come to our city so long as we have the state capitol here and the University of Texas and the quality of life we have. People are going to want to come. I think that would be a difficult thing to do that way, but I think that there are ways that we need to manage growth so that it doesn't manage us.
Mr. Martinez.
I think it's going to be pretty difficult to avoid growth anywhere in Austin, Texas at the rates that we're growing. But what we've done is laid plans and foundations for how we want to grow and where the priority growth corridors are. Through the Imagine Austin plan, having a compact and connected city, having growth nodes within our community, that is where we know the transit also exists. We have done the land planning just west of here in West Campus. We created an overlay to allow more students to live here, which actually dropped ridership at Capital Metro, but it was appropriate land planning.
That's time. Thank you.
Mr. Martinez, you did touch on the homestead question. I want us to go a little bit deeper on that topic. There is an increasing cost of living in Austin, much of it tied to property taxes. If you cap taxes for any residents, what specific cuts would you make to city programs or services to make up for the loss in revenue? And if you're not thinking about capping taxes, how would you address affordability? Mr. Adler, I believe it's your turn to go first.
Well, with respect to the homestead exemption, which is something that Austin should do, the same way that Houston and Dallas and Fort Worth and even Travis County gives its citizens, because it's relief we can give. It would be better if we could do a flat tax or a capped tax, but the legislature doesn't give us the power to do that, and we can't wait on the state. We should use the tools we have. And this tool is needed by the people that need it most. The property tax burden on lower income folks is 4 times greater than it is on the top 1%. And there are 200,000 people. Half the people in the city live in homes that are worth less than $200,000, 80% less than $400,000. This is relief we can give, and how do you pay for it? There are several different ways that the council could choose between. They could use surpluses without cutting any kind of essential services, or they could set it as a priority, or they could adjust the tax rate to shift the tax burden to commercial property without cutting anything, without changing, keeping it absolutely revenue neutral, but just serving to move how we do taxes, because right now the burden on residential property tax is no longer balanced with commercial property, and we should fix that. That means there's going to be an impact on renters, so we need to do things like adjusting the unfair and improper, and I think illegal way that we've been charging the drainage fee on tenants. We should fix that too, and on balance those two is going to be a net savings for renters. This is a tool we have and we should use it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
Well, Mike, if there's one thing that I've learned at City Hall in my time as a council member is you can't make a $36 million proposal in a single budget year and not cut services or raise taxes, which is exactly what he just said when he talks about neutralizing the cost effect. Neutralizing the cost effect means you raise the taxes to cover the cost of the $36 million, or you cut city services. The bottom line is it's very difficult to find $36 million. But we've shown, I have shown in my time on council, that you have to ask the hard questions during budget presentations. You have to question management, and you have to question staff. Why do you need a new $70 million headquarters for Austin Energy when we just raised rates on our customers? That project went away. Why do you need 700 vacant employees in the budget with no plan to hire them through the entire year? That's $60 million that we were able to save the taxpayers. Those are the kinds of things that you learn when you go to City Hall, that you just can't make these lofty promises to folks and not tell them what city services you're going to cut. We have to consolidate where we can. We have to live within our budget, and we have to, find efficiencies within our own existing government if we're going to move forward on things like affordability and trying to cut taxes and trying to provide affordability relief for our citizens. But it's just not as simple as saying we can do it. I know we can do it.
Okay. What specific programs would you look to address affordability?
To address affordability, the one I mentioned is literally trying to do everything we can to increase our investment in social services. As the chairman of Health and Human Services and as a former Austin firefighter, and this is actually where I learned it, I know that by not funding those who need it the most, they pick up the phone and they call 911. When what they really needed was an appointment at a doctor's office or a nutrition specialist to help them understand the health effects that they're being affected by.
I'm sorry, that's your time. Mr. Adler, you mentioned commercial property and sort of chewing that up. You might run into a little bit of opposition there from a number of sectors, including the legislature. How would you go about doing what you're suggesting?
Oh, what I just suggested was something that we can do. We don't need legislative approval for that. The legislature has given the city very few tools with which to deal with property tax reform, and we need to do that in the city. We need to get the state to do the things that we hope they would do too, but we can't wait for that. There are things we can do now. We can fix to make sure that property is appropriately appraised. We could do this homestead exemption and adjust the tax rate, which would shift the balance. There are still things we can do here.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Austin is short about 41,000 rental units, and that number is continuing to grow. Can we really build our way out of this problem? Mr. Martinez, I believe you're first.
I believe we can. I believe we have to build our way out of it. What we can't do, and what I've said on the campaign trail, is we can't bond our way out of this affordability crisis. We can't keep asking our citizens every few years, will you give us $50 or $60 million or $80 million to build these affordable units? We have to have market-driven solutions. I led the effort to change our zoning category called the planned unit development. And what we said was, if you're going to come and ask us for this zoning category, here are the community values that we want in your project. One of those is affordability, creating units that are required under that zoning category to be affordable. Those are the kinds of market-driven solutions that we need moving forward. We need to find city surplus property that we no longer have plans to use and partner with housing developers, because the highest cost for building a home isn't the home, it's the dirt. So we have a tremendous asset in surplus property at the city that I think we should be putting back onto the tax rolls, working with private developers so that the citizens don't have to subsidize every affordable unit that we need to achieve moving forward.
Mr. Adler.
And again, this is another example. We have a $41,000 gap That's what people are able to afford so that they can live here in this city. And as you think about it, I don't think Austin is on a path to reach that 41,000 number of units. We do things ad hoc, we do things small, and we need to think big. What is the plan to actually get us there? There are cities around the country that are moving forward with urban conservancy ideas, where they're buying up housing stock in front of the appreciation curve so that they can buy things before they get turned into high-priced condos and buy them and keep them at that level. And they do it through social financing projects where people are willing to invest, not as a contribution, but knowing that they'll get their original sum back, not with the interest rate that you might get in the open market, but people are willing to invest that way, kind of like a U.S. Treasury note. We should have Austin bonds that people can invest so that we can start buying up that stock, just like the Nature Conservancy does it with open space land. But we need to think bigger, because we have to figure out what is the path that gets us to providing housing for that number of people in our community. Poverty in this city has gone up 70% in the last 10 years. Residential suburban poverty has gone up 140%. We need to think bigger and long-term and substantively resolve these serious challenges.
So for a follow-up, so you'll be working with a city council made up of 10 members from 10 new geographic districts, different neighborhood groups and associations within those districts. So for what each of you has put forward as an answer, how do you work with 10 representatives from 10 different parts of the city that have 10 different sets of needs and wishes? Mr. Adler, you first.
Well, I think it's incredibly exciting, the 10-1 process that we're moving into. I think it is a gift to the city. Cities don't get chances to do a culture government restart, and we have one. We're going to have, with the districts, new leaders and new communities sitting at the table for the very first time. We have a chance to do things with Austin that we haven't been able to do in the past. I don't believe the premise of the question that we're in different places and looking for different things is true. I think there are common problems in this city that we can work on together.
Mr. Martinez.
So most people in Austin want us to solve the affordability problem. Most people in Austin want us to solve the homelessness problem. They just don't want it in their neighborhood. And that's going to be the responsibility of the mayor, to make sure that these council members are as successful as they can be representing their new district, but understanding that we have a citywide problem as it relates to affordability and affordable units. And we're going to have to embrace this policy and tackle this problem from a community-wide basis. You can't come to City Hall and say, yes, we're going to work on this, but it's not going to go in my district.
That's time. Thank you.
We're going to move into public safety now. A few of our viewers brought up the Austin Police Department and the relationship between APD and the community. So how will you improve trust between APD and citizens? I believe, Mr. Adler, it's your turn.
I think it's a question of communications, and we certainly have an issue in this city. You know, we have a public safety that has us one of the safest communities in the country, and for that we should be very proud. But at the same time, there are concerns in parts of our community, and we need to increase communications. We should hold our law enforcement accountable, and they expect to be held accountable. We should do that. You know, I helped form the Austin Hate Crimes Task Force in this city, so as to bring different people from different places in this city around those kinds of issues together to increase communications. When you look at the problems that are happening right now in cities around the country, a lot of those are being generated from communities that do not have the level of communications that we need in this city.
Okay, Mr. Martinez.
You know, I've learned a lot as a council member, and one of the things that I've learned that's most valuable is when something in our community happens, you have to address it straight on. You can't sugarcoat it, and you can't make excuses. 100% of all fatal officer-involved shootings in Austin, Texas over the last 10 years has been with an African-American man or a Hispanic man. And that's a problem. And because I'm willing to make statements like that, and because I'm willing to challenge our community, that's our problem. We have to solve it. It's not APD's problem. It's not the mayor's problem. It's our problem. And we are seeing the ill effects of lack of trust with police departments all across the country. With Michael Brown now in New York, and right here in Austin, Texas, Mr. Jackson's case is coming up, and Officer Kleinert is on trial. We have an issue here, and we've eroded that trust through our own actions. We must have leadership that's willing to face those issues head on, that's willing to call them for what they are. They're mistakes, and we have to own up to them. But you can't be fearful of upsetting your police officers by saying things like that. You have to be a strong leader. You have to be out in front of those issues, and you have to get the community to help you solve those issues as well.
Okay. Speaking of out in front, are there proactive steps that a council can take policy-wise? Body cameras is a program I think that NCBI does called Cops and Communities. Anything like that, Mr. Martinez?
You know, this may sound cliche, but I've said it before. A camera can only take a picture of ignorance. People can solve ignorance. People can solve problems. I'm not opposed to body cameras. I'm not opposed to cameras on light poles. I think they help in certain circumstances. But what we have is a people problem when it comes to trust. We don't have an image snapshot problem. So I believe that there are policy initiatives that we can take, but it's going to take a leader that's willing to have those difficult conversations and be out in the community to try to solve it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adler.
I think there are things that the city should be doing to improve the infrastructure so as to better prepare ourselves and better to hold everyone accountable. And I think body cameras, as the technology improves and allows that to happen, is something that we should be considering and doing in the city. We should increase the community policing that goes in the city so that communities know the public safety officials that are in and around them. And again, I think that it's a question of communications. It's a question of having people together so that on both sides, both in the community and the police, they understand where the other's coming from.
Okay, that's your time. Did want to ask you both another follow-up. These programs can get extremely expensive. Mr. Adler, are you willing to go down that road, and how are you going to pay for it?
Well, I think that the community has to set priorities. And as with any kind of budgeting process. And I think that we should be, as a council, sitting down and looking at those kinds of priorities. I also think that as you move forward, there's going to be a lot more interaction between the private sector and philanthropy and city government. If you look at the services that are being provided outside of the government by civic organizations and by community organizations in this city. There are a lot of organizations and thousands of people doing absolutely wonderful things in this city. I think that the government and the mayor's ability to use his power to convene can pull together these groups and have this work being done in a more efficient way. I think that it is a public-private partnership that is ultimately going to be able to help us with the resource issues that over time are probably going to get more and more constricting for government. So I think we need to move in that direction as well.
Okay, Mr. Martinez.
I think it's a great question, Mike. We paid millions of dollars, you all did. You as citizens paid millions of dollars for us to equip our Austin Police Department vehicles with cameras, with DVD recorders in the trunk. And guess what? They don't get turned on. By the flick of a switch, they aren't turned on. Magically, they don't work. Something happens to them. That becomes an issue. That erodes trust when you spend that much money and yet they malfunction or the officer didn't turn it on. For me, in my experience at City Hall, again, when code enforcement came forward and said we want 19 new positions to improve code enforcement, I felt like you need to change your culture first. So I fought against those employees being added to code enforcement and said, here's what you need. You need one person to train your code enforcement officers to better understand what's out in our community, to make better decisions. You have to look at the existing culture and the changes that you can make before you start throwing good money after bad ideas, because they won't solve the problem if you don't get to the root of it. And in these cases, I think there's more to it than just buying a bunch of new cameras and starting to film things. We have to start with people policies first.
All right, we're going to move on now to a question about growth. According to a set of statistics provided by Civic Analytics, the city of Austin ranks #1 in job growth, #2 in population growth, and #3 in GDP growth among all U.S. metro areas, this since the year 2000. What can the new council do specifically, policy-wise, to keep these numbers where they are? Mr. Martinez, I believe you're first.
I'm not sure that we need to do anything to keep them where they are. Here's what we need to do, though. We need economic equality, not economic prosperity. With these numbers, when you look at this, and we're #1 at job growth, we're #1 at population growth, we're #1 at GDP growth, yet we still have 26% of our school children living below the federal poverty line. We have to have economic equality. I have fought the hardest as a council member to change our economic incentive policies that says if you want to move your company here, you can't ask us for one dime to help you unless you pay $11 an hour minimum wage, unless you pay prevailing wages, and unless you provide health care benefits. Can you believe that the companies that we have subsidized, that you have subsidized, some of them weren't even providing health care benefits to their employees? So guess where they were going for health care services? To Central Health, calling 911, costing you all. Some of the companies that we provided incentives to were protesting their property taxes each and every year, which was turning the economic model upside down. We have to change our policies to create economic equality, not economic prosperity for just a select few.
Mr. Adler.
I think we need both economic prosperity and economic equality. And we seem to be doing really well with prosperity, and we need for that to continue, and we need to maintain the climate that allows that to happen. We're bringing in more jobs than anybody else, but 57% of those jobs don't pay a living wage. We need to do better than that. That means that we're doing really good with the high-level jobs and a good job with the low-level jobs. We're not working in the middle the way that we need, which ultimately we're going to need in order to be able to preserve those prosperity numbers. When we give incentives to companies, we need to look for not only a return on investment, but a return on our values. We need to bring in companies that are bringing in middle-class jobs for people who live here and are training people who live here for those middle-class jobs. And that's how we ought to be spending the incentives that we use. We have great programs in this city that are training people and giving them the skills in order to be able to move up the economic ladder and to have opportunity. But some of the best programs in our city, Capital Idea, for example, doing a wonderful job, graduating students, and then almost all of them getting jobs, are turning out 70 graduates a year. We should be turning out 700 graduates a year and 1,400 graduates a year. And this city has to figure out how to scale that, because that gap in the middle, the divergence in wealth in this city, the fact that 53% of African American kids and 44% of Hispanic kids are living in poverty is something we need to fix.
All right, so given our current growth trajectory, our current growth situation, should you take action to encourage this sort of growth? Mr. Adler, you first.
Well, I think it goes back to the question we had before. I'm not sure that we don't need to encourage growth. Growth is going to come here because we have a wonderful city. Growth is going to come here as long as we have the state capitol and the University of Texas, and the quality of life that we enjoy in the city. Growth is going to come, but so the question isn't how do you stop growth, because I don't think that you can. The question is how do you manage that growth, and how do you manage it instead of having it manage us.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez.
I believe we set the path for how we want to grow as a city through Imagine Austin, and I believe that is the direction that we're heading. We need to make sure that the growth that's coming is in the right places, that it's the right kind of growth, and that it's not causing further ill effects that we face today as it relates to traffic congestion, lack of access to quality jobs, lack of access to public transportation. The Imagine Austin plan gives us that footprint. It gives us the ability to understand, with the growth that's coming, where is it best suited.
Thank you.
And that sets up our next question. What is the next corridor for density in Austin, Mr. Adler?
The next corridor for density?
Yes.
You know, I think that as you look at how the population is growing in this city, it's growing to the northeast. I think it should also be growing to the east. There's a large tract of undeveloped land, the Robinson Ranch up toward Round Rock, and I think that that's an area that growth is going to occur. It could be an area that we have a midtown kind of situation. We also have growth that's going to be along the SH-130 corridor, north of the airport, south of 290. We have infrastructure that exists there. We have large residential subdivisions that are being planned. I think those are probably two areas where it's going to start heading.
Okay. Mr. Martinez.
I've been in East Austin for 23 years as an Austin firefighter and lived in 4 East Austin residents. I currently live on East 11th Street. Trust me, if there's growth moving anywhere in Austin, it's in East Austin. But I don't think we need to do necessarily anything to try to stop it or halt it. But we need to put some policies in place, so that long-term Austinites can stay in their neighborhoods, so that they don't get pushed out. When I look at growth corridors and I look at 183, think about Ed Bluestein Boulevard. Used to have Motorola, Tracor. It's just vacant land now. There's no ancillary services, and it's all zone limited industrial. take that property that's 10 minutes from the urban core, 15 minutes from campus, and maybe add a mixed-use component, or maybe revert it to a residential component, so that we can have opportunities for folks to live in the urban core of Austin, still maintain some affordability, but also protect the long-term East Austinites through things like the Homestead Preservation District that would allow them to stay in their neighborhoods and not be pushed out because of rising property values.
Okay. Growth and density, of course, can be two different things and have been in the history of Austin. Where is density appropriate, Mr. Martinez?
Obviously, downtown, I think, is the most appropriate for when you're talking about high-rise density, but there are certain areas of our community that we have identified specifically connected to public transit where we know that it's probably most appropriate for density. So areas like Airport Boulevard, Lamar, and Justin, that area where there is the Justin Lane station, East MLK, where the MLK station exists, and right downtown, just east of downtown, the Saltillo tract that's 12 acres of vacant land that Cap Metro has just embarked upon negotiations for that development.
And that's your time, Mr. Adler.
You know, I think that it needs to be downtown. We need greater density downtown in order to be able to drive the transit system and get the density and the critical mass to have that happen along corridors and in activity centers. But I would hasten to add the corollary of that question. It doesn't have to happen in the middle of our neighborhoods. And I don't believe that it's a zero-sum game. I think we can achieve a density and still protect our neighborhoods at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
All right. The Austin Independent School District represents a large chunk of city homeowners' tax bills. What, if anything, can you do with the new council to work with AISD to make tax dollars go further? Mr. Martinez, I believe you're first.
Yeah, AISD is actually the largest portion of your tax bill. The city portion is about 17 to 18%. And quite honestly, they're heading for a major crisis. This year, they're going to face a $30 million shortfall. Next year, that jumps to a $100 million shortfall. We have to do better as citizens. And what I've heard on the campaign trail is that citizens have said, you know what, I probably would support you raising my taxes if I knew it was going to education, or if I knew it was going to fund pre-K programs, universal pre-K for all of our citizens. This year, we did a modest approach to helping offset those negative effects of state funding cuts. We had 8,000 students lose after-school programs in June. We invested about $1 million this year back into those programs, but it's a drop in the bucket based on what we know they're facing. The mayor and the council should be much more active in working directly with our school district. There's one meeting every quarter where the mayor, the county judge, and the school board president meet in public. And I dare say it's one of the most powerful groups of people meeting, and no one knows about it, and no one goes, and really no policies come out of it. We need to do better and take that committee and take it to a higher level to where policies can come out of it, and we can take those initiatives back to our respective bodies and work together closely.
Mr. Adler.
I've never understood why education wasn't a higher priority of the mayor's office or the city council in the city, because there are few things that impact the quality of life in the city as much as education. You know, a 90-second debate like this is difficult to get answers out. I'd send everybody to my website where there's a 15-page paper on education. But we do need to have our mayors and our city council do what mayors and city councils are doing in other cities to make education a priority. We should have universal pre-K for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, and there's state money we're not pulling down that we should. There are ways for the city to provide wraparound services that are currently being provided by the school right now with those dollars that they have to share with the state. We could adjust our tax rate in a way that kept everybody in the city's tax rate exactly the same, but picking up some of those services, and we don't have to pay recapture to the state, and we could keep more of that money here. You know, we're losing the school district over $100 million this year, almost $300 million in just a year or two, and there are things that we could be doing if in fact we are willing to be forward-looking. Again, this is not a new problem. This is not a new challenge. We just haven't done anything with it so far, and we need to.
All right, so what specifically would you do as mayor, given the relationship between the City of Austin and AISD? What specifically would you do as mayor to make sure the quality of education is equitable across the entire city. Mr. Adler.
Well, I hasten to add first, it's just not AISD because we have more school districts than that in the city. We need to work with them all. And I think, again, what we're talking about in terms of working with the school district much more closely than we have historically to provide wraparound services, to provide opportunities for working those tax rates the same, to use the mayor's power to convene people in the community the way Mayor Castro did in San Antonio to help drive universal pre-K.
Thank you. Mr. Martinez.
One of the first things that we're going to have to do this January is we're going to have to go down to the legislature and fight against legislation that could further cripple our public education system. We have new leadership coming in that has made it very clear that they want to implement programs like a voucher system in all public school systems. Can you imagine the crippling effects that vouchers would have on a school district like AISD should something like that pass? The mayor is going to have to be very active in defending our community, in defending bad policies at the legislature.
Thank you.
For the last 2 years, the council has operated under new rules regarding, well, relatively new rules regarding the Open Meetings Act. These rules limit the number of council members who can talk together about a policy issue at one time. You guys are going to have a number of new colleagues coming into office. How will you handle discussions of citywide issues in light of this rule? I believe, Mr. Adler, you go first.
I think that public transparency is real important. People have a right to be able to see how decisions are made for the government, and that's what those laws were intended to provide for, and we should insist that our public have that measure of transparency and access. At the same time, I think that the rules that the City Council is operating on right now are overly restrictive. I think they prevent colleagues on a panel from being able to talk to one another, and gauge temperature and have the normal conversations that any of us would have with people that we were going to be making decisions with. I think it's going to be this council working with each other to set the rules, working with the attorneys that we have, also coming in with an attorney's background and being able to independently assess that, and then coming up with rules that we can move forward for governing that are not the same rules that we've been operating under the last several years. I think that's going to require us working with David Escamilla in the county attorney's office, but this is something that critically has to happen in the city. And I think that how we set up how this new council gets started, because what is subject to that rule are deliberations, this council should be spending a lot of time initially talking about policy and long-term visions and things that are not refereeing or deciding specific disputes or specific controversies. And I think that that will give the council additional opportunity within which to interact.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
We absolutely have to meet and communicate with one another, and it can be done, and it can be transparent, and it can be in compliance with Open Meetings Act. If necessary, I plan to meet with each and every council member and do it in the atrium and post it publicly so that the community can come listen to us talk. We have to work with one another. This is going to be the most significant historic change in our city's governance. And to be operating under this restrictive environment of not being able to talk to a colleague is just not going to be beneficial to our citizens. That's who gets hurt the most. The one body that makes this decision on Open Meetings Act is the one body that doesn't have to comply with it. They meet as a whole in caucus, in private, at the legislature. I'm not asking for that. I don't think we need that. I believe that we can comply fully with Open Meetings Act, but this new council is going to have to be able to communicate with one another, specifically because we're coming into this from a geographic perspective. We now have council members in geographic districts. The districts that's adjacent to their districts on each side, they're going to have to be really close, working with them really closely to get their policy initiatives done. I think it can be done. If it means that we have to post it and meet in public each and every day, I'm completely fine with that. But I will go to the county attorney and I will ask him to help us devise that plan so that this new council can communicate and can meet with one another on the issues that affect our citizens.
Do you believe it will be necessary to challenge the county attorney's interpretation of the rule?
I don't. Initially, no. I want the county attorney to help us. The county attorney has made his opinion very clear that he felt like what we were doing in meeting in our offices with our colleagues, that could constitute a violation of Open Meetings Act. I'm okay with that ruling. Tell me the rules and we'll comply with them, because what we were doing is exactly what other council members had been doing for 20 plus years leading up to this council. So all I'm asking, what I will do is ask him for that roadmap to comply with the Open Meetings Act, but allow us to communicate.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adler, will you challenge the county attorney?
I hope for that it's not necessary, because I think that we ought to be able to sit down and negotiate rules that work for the city and enable our government to move forward the way that it should. But I'm prepared to challenge in court that issue if it's necessary.
Thank you, sir.
All right. We hear time and again people are dissatisfied with their interactions with the city. Whose responsibility is it to improve those interactions? And Mr. Martinez, you're first.
Well, I guess it depends on what department you're calling and on what day. But yes, we hear it a lot. And it is the council's responsibility. It is the elected body's responsibility. We can only hire and fire one city employee. We appoint 5, but the one city employee that we hire and fire is the city manager. We have to hold our city manager accountable when complaints arise to us through citizens about a specific department, a specific agency, or a specific issue within the city. We are a council manager form of government, and until our citizens, if our citizens choose to change that, this is the environment we operate under. But I can tell you, it's wholly frustrating, because I get calls from citizens each and every day saying, what are you going to do about the electric utility? What are you going to do about this service or that service? And all we can do is forward those on to their respective departments. If there are policies that need to be changed, then what you see every Thursday is items from council members affecting those policy changes to try to make a better outcome for our citizens. But it does become wholly frustrating. I have been arguably the most vocally and openly critical of our city management when necessary. Not everyone does everything wrong. There are things that the city manager has done very well, but we absolutely must hold the city manager accountable so that citizens can have a better outcome when they have issues arise.
Thank you. Mr. Adler.
When I filed to run for mayor, you initiate that process by filing a single piece of paper. It's your treasurer appointment form. You put in a name and you sign it, and you have to give an electronic version of that document to the city. Do you know how you deliver that electronic document? You can't go online and upload it. You can't email it to someone. You have to go down to the clerk and physically hand the electronic version of that document across the counter with a thumb drive or a floppy or a CD. The city needs to do better. It is ultimately the city council's responsibility to set the standard and to set the expectation. We have a permitting process in this city that needs new software. It needs better interaction. Departments need to better be able to talk to each other. This, again, is not a new problem. This is something that we hear about a lot. And at some point, you need leadership that's going to say, this gets better, and then makes it better. Holds the line so that we give the tools to the staff for them to be able to do the kinds of jobs that we want them to do, to set the culture of customer service in the city, so that when people feel like they go down to the city, they're being helped in achieving what it is that they want to get accomplished. And I think that culture and those expectations are set by the city council.
All right, so a follow-up for each of you. Mr. Adler, first, you said give the city the tools that it needs. What are those tools, and how do we pay for them if they require more people, more services, whatever the case may be?
Well, I think that there's a study that's going to be coming out to the city here in the next couple of weeks. I had heard that it was ready and might have come out a couple months ago, but for whatever reason it's coming out after the election. But I think that it'll point out that we need new software and we need perhaps new hardware, I'm not sure. But then it becomes a priority. But I think that there is a return to be paid in this city if we can speed up that process, because right now the fact that it's not working is dictating what gets built and what's not being built in ways that cost us money.
Mr. Martinez, you mentioned City Manager Mark Ott. Do you believe the city manager should remain in his job?
Well, I go back to what I said earlier. We could spend millions of dollars in software and still not solve the problem. You have to start with the individuals first. I am fully prepared and able to move forward on an item that would look for a new city manager if that is what this council decided to do. You have to be able to start with the people first. And the only person that we can start with as a council is the city manager. I have been critical of the city manager when I believe it's necessary, but the decision to hire and fire the manager is up to the entire council, not one individual.
And that's time. Thank you.
It's been said that the city of Austin is a city of plans on shelves. Name a past project you would like to dust off and implement in your first term, if there is one. Mr. Adler, go first. I'm sorry, Mr. Adler.
Yeah, I was just trying to think, on the plans that we have, we move forward on. I think that the transportation plans that we have in this city have never gotten us to completion. We start with those and then they stop, and then they seem to get put on the shelf, and I want us to see us moving continually through that. We have the Imagine Austin plan, which is being executed. There are component parts of that that help move in to make up that I think are getting lost in terms of the translation and in the institution of the Imagine Austin plan. But I wouldn't start with the plans. I would start with what the goals were that we were trying to achieve. I would look at the poverty level we have in this city, and I would say, I want to get on a path that enables us to be able to resolve those issues. We have a housing issue in this city, and I would identify those numbers so we can objectively measure. I would work toward objective measurements and criteria that would demonstrate success, and I think we should be driving towards those.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Martinez.
The first thing we need to do is be bold and aggressive in trying to tackle this issue of affordability. So the first thing that I would do is look at eliminating duplicative services and consolidating where we could. We are the largest city in the country that runs a separate EMS and a separate fire department. We have 2 recruiting departments, 2 HR departments, 2 training departments for each one of those. But I think it can go a step further. Look at our water utility and our electric utility. They're both basically the exact same model. They sell a commodity to our citizens, and they take the benefits of selling that commodity and invest back into city services. Why wouldn't we look at consolidating things like our water utility and our electric utility, potentially saving millions and millions of dollars? That is how we're going to affect things like affordability. That is how we're going to be able to do things like lower the tax rate, saves our citizens money. If our citizens see that we're really trying to live within our own means, really trying to cut services as opposed to just raising taxes and adding more bureaucracy, I think they will be more supportive of other initiatives like transportation, like city services. But they need to see a hard example of where we're really trying to make a difference in cutting within our own means. I think consolidation of duplicative services is a very good start.
Okay. Is there a part of Imagine Austin that you would scrap or change, Mr. Martinez?
I can't think of one right now. I know there's one on the agenda I hear this coming week. At this point, I haven't seen the full language of that item. It's to eliminate the terms of compact and connected from Imagine Austin. I can't imagine us eliminating that as a goal from our 50-year visioning of Austin. But again, I'm not going to make a commitment until I fully read the item and understand it a little better.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Adler.
I would not take compact and connected out of Imagine Austin plan, because I think those are important goals, but they're not the only goals in Imagine Austin. And we need to make sure that the other goals are also getting equal footing and equal attention. I would not be in favor of consolidating the water utility and the electric utility. I don't think the problem there is with respect to consolidation. I think it's with respect to the business model. Both of them are dependent on selling more and more of a commodity we're going to sell less and less of, and we don't have a business plan that survives the next 10 or 12 years that recognizes that.
So we have actually come to the end of our time for questions, but we do want to give you each the opportunity for a closing statement, something you would like to let the voters know. You'll each have 1.5 minutes for that closing statement. And Mr. Martinez, yours is first.
Well, I want to thank the sponsors, KLRU, the Monitor, KUT. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your Sunday to be here today. It's been a long campaign. It's almost a year now. We started back in January, basically, but it's been an incredible honor to be a city council member in Austin, Texas, and it's been an equal honor to serve as a firefighter. I was able to live 2 dreams of a lifetime, being an Austin firefighter and an Austin city council member. This would even be a higher honor, but there are clear differences in the candidates before you. I represent an everyday Austinite that came here with a hope and a dream. I made $4.50 an hour working construction as a 19-year-old, going to Austin Community College. This city is magical. It gave me opportunities just like it's given so many others opportunities. And I love this city like nothing else. But I believe the mayor should be the strongest voice for middle-class, hardworking Austinites, that someone that knows what it's like to struggle to make ends meet. A city employee that rose up and became a council member and potentially a mayor. This is a historic election, and with these new council members coming in, I do believe that experience matters. I do believe that it's going to take someone who knows why government's important, how it can help people, and why it matters.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. That's time. Mr. Adler.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. I've been in Austin for 36 years, and I love this city. It's a magical place. But I'm concerned about Austin. I think it's at a tipping point. The challenges we're facing today are not new. They have been with us: transportation, affordability, the permitting process, water, education. These are not new problems. We can hear new ideas today, but you wonder where they were the last 8 years. We need to move forward in a direction different than we've been moving in the past, and now is the time to do that. You know, what is affirming about this election is that people all over the city want a new way. We've been fortunate to be endorsed by the Austin Neighborhood Council as well as the Progressive Coalition and lots of Democratic groups. But we've also been support from the Chamber, a lot of people in the business community. And I have never seen as wide a support base as we have in this election right now in the city of Austin. And that's why I think the potential exists to actually do move forward in a new way, in a different direction, to be able to solve the challenges that we haven't been able to solve so far. You know, we can choose the status quo, and we can keep doing what we have done in the past. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that things will get better. I think they'll get worse. Or we can choose to look at things in a new way, make government more thoughtful and more deliberative, more proactive, less reactive, more forward-looking, more long-term. And that's what Austin's like. We're the live music capital of the world. We should be known as the social innovation capital of the world as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Thank you, Michael Caden. Thanks to Mr. Martinez and Mr. Adler for joining us. Early voting is now underway and runs through Friday, December 12th. Runoff election day is December 16th. On behalf of KUT, KLRU, and the Austin Monitor, I'm Jennifer Staten. Thanks so much for joining us.
Support for Civic Summit is made possible by Urban Land Institute, impacting land use issues in Central Texas, austin.uli.org, and by Texas Mutual Insurance Company, providing workers' compensation for Texas employers.